Hello, everyone. This is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today, I'm on again with Dr. Philip Center. We're going to be talking about dinosaurs throughout history. So, many people, most specifically young Earth creationists, have claimed that there are dinosaurs in archaeology and art from as early as the times of the ancient Near East in Egypt and Babylon, all the way up to the 20th century in Native American stories of Stegosaurus dinosaurs and all these other sauropods and all this other stuff. So we're going to be talking about the day. Dr. Center has written a number of different peer-reviewed journal articles and books on this topic. How are you doing today, Dr. Center?
Doing very well. It's a good day. How about you, Zach?
I am doing wonderful. So this is a really, really fun topic. A lot of really interesting claims. So I mostly came from this after looking at your book. I was like, we have to talk about this. So you don't have that book that you can show people right now, do you?
Not on hand.
Ah, darn. Okay, well, you can pretend like it's on the screen right here. It'll be in the description, everybody, if you want to check it out.
Okay.
What is it? Dinosaurs in the Bible or something like that?
It's the real story of dinosaurs
Yeah.
and dragons, as opposed to the fake story that Answers in Genesis and so forth are promoting.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. So yeah, check it out in the description. Really, really interesting stuff. It doesn't talk specific. It has a number of different chapters on this specific topic, but it also talks about understanding the biblical text, understanding the science behind a lot of the popular claims out there. So I would strongly recommend people check it out. But let's get started here. So one of the really fun ones that is just really interesting is the claim of St. George and the dragon. Some people might be familiar with that, but we'll get into it here. But basically, the logic is that there's all these dragons throughout history or art that looks like a dinosaur in this painting or whatever. Well, I'll throw one on the screen here. So St. George, and he's got this like dragon looking figure, and a lot of people are like, hey, that looks like a dragon, or it could be a dragon, or it could be based off a dragon. So we're going to talk about all these different claims here today, specifically starting out with St. George. So St. George and the dragon, could you tell us maybe what the general claim is here? Is there a specific argument that people might give for this being a dinosaur? And assuming that you don't think it is a dinosaur, could you give us a little bit of background of what this creature might have been seen as in this time period?
Sure. So let's start right from the beginning with the background. And even before the story of St. George and the dragon, there were stories of other saints and dragons that came out of the Christianity of the period of the culture of the Roman Empire. And in these early stories of saints, very often things would be added that never happened, but were meant to show how holy the saint was, like the dispelling of a monster, very often a giant serpent. And in Latin, the word for serpent is draco. This is the word from which dragon comes ultimately. It's Greek drakon, Latin draco, ultimately became in English dragon. But back in the days of ancient Rome, it simply meant a large snake. And we know this because all these various stories that the ancient Romans had with a draco in them, when they illustrated these stories in sculpture and painting, the draco is always just shown as a snake. So we know what the word meant. Now, these early stories of saints dispelling a snake often had a talking serpent, which was supposed to personify the devil or his minions or something along those lines. And when we add this to another phenomenon, we ultimately come up with the St. George story. And the other phenomenon is that in the very, very late days of ancient Rome, when it had split into an Eastern and Western Empire, and we call the Eastern Empire the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine emperors were flooding the Mediterranean area with these coins that had a human figure trampling a serpent. And so essentially this is a dragon slayer. Sometimes it would be the figure of victory, a figure derived from myth, and basically victory over a dragon, because Satan, the dragon, is the enemy of the state in the Byzantine Empire, because they had adopted Christianity after Emperor Saint Constantine became an endorser of Christianity. So there's all these images out there from the 4th century, the 5th century, the 6th century on coins of someone who represents the power of the state spearing a dragon. Well, next thing you know, military saints who had been soldiers in life, were shown on iconography spearing the dragon, enemy of the state, because, a soldier defends the state. And the iconography of St. George doing this first appears in the 7th century, if I remember correctly, and he's spearing a snake, just a straight up snake, a serpent with no bells and whistles, no legs, no wings or anything. And so we see that the earliest St. George iconography having this same sort of spear the dragon, Satan, enemy of the state kind of thing. Well, later on, in the Middle Ages, artists started adding bells and whistles to dragons to make them more impressive. Maybe a pair of legs, a pair of wings, and after that point, we see St. George spearing this dragon with legs and wings and so forth. And fast forward a few centuries, we got the Crusades going on. The Crusaders, for some reason, thought St. George was awesome, and they made him the patron saint of England. Now, fast forward a few more centuries, and dinosaurs get discovered by science, and the young Earth creationist, anti-evolution contingent gets a hold of the story of St. George and sees these dragons with feet that kind of look dinosaurian. And they got the idea that, the story of St. George must have come from the actual saint confronting a dinosaur, and that's how the story came about. Well, to even think that shows that you don't know the history of the iconography, because the very earliest images are of St. George spearing a snake. And they also show that you don't know the story of St. George himself, because he wasn't English. He in the stories of him, there's no indication at all that he ever set foot in England, and yet these young Earth creationists are saying specifically that he slew an English theropod dinosaur. Usually they identify it specifically as Baryonyx, sometimes Megalosaurus. And the idea behind that seems to be, if he's the patron saint of England, he must have been English, so his dinosaur must have been English. But all these are just misconceptions by people who just have not done their homework.
Yeah. A common theme of this conversation is a lot of these dinosaurs are, like, if you just look at it for more than 5 seconds, you're like, maybe there is a more reasonable explanation than that there's just dinosaurs. And the fun thing about this conversation is that a lot of these claims aren't necessarily claims. It's a lot of this looks like a dinosaur. Could it be a dinosaur?
Yeah,
right.
Sometimes they're just asking a question rather than making an out-and-out claim. Yeah, which is wiser.
Right, which is that you're right. That is true. It is, maybe that is a better approach, but it's kind of like it's like, yeah, sure, it's possible. It's the sky being green is also possible. So what is the most likely thing here? That's what people really should be caring about here.
Yes.
So you don't think that there's any way this could be based off of a dinosaur? maybe they saw a dinosaur and that's why they started, changing it from a snake to a dragon or whatever.
Well, like you said, anything is possible. The sky being green is possible. It's possible I might step outside my door and get hit on the head with a meteorite. But the likelihood is just really low. And in this case, I think similarly that the likelihood is really low that dragon legends are based on human encounters with dinosaurs. And I say this because the last non-avian dinosaurs in the fossil record are 66 million years old and up, which means we're separated from them by a huge amount of time. Of course, the young Earth creationist movement does not accept the passage of millions of years. So that's not an issue for them. But for those who accept the findings of science, it makes it very unlikely that any live human ever encountered a live dinosaur.
Yeah, there is also the question of like, if I throw it up here, like these quote unquote dinosaurs have wings, and I mean there are some similarities, but even on the right side here, or both of them. Oh, sorry, I messed up here. Oh, spoiler for the yeah. So these dragons, it looks like they have 2 legs. Is that right? And then a tail.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. And in fact, the earliest representations of dragons they're elaborated beyond simple snakehood have either a pair of legs or a pair of wings or both. And the wings are always feathered in the beginning. You don't get those bat wings until a few centuries later. You don't get quadrupedal dragons till a few centuries later. So maybe an argument could be made that these early dragon depictions are based on theropod dinosaurs because the dromaeosaurid and troodontid theropods did have a feathered set of wings. The problem with this is, of course, time scale is a major problem. And also, very often the tail is shown coiling. And this is a snake attribute, the ability to coil the tail. Dromaeosaurid theropods could not coil the tail. Their tail was ramrod straight. It could barely even bend. And a troodontid had a very stiff tail, not quite ramrod straight, but there's no way it could have coiled. So these illustrations are definitely not based on anyone seeing an actual theropod, I think. Also, all the fossils that we know of with the feathered theropod dinosaurs have a fan of feathers at the end of the tail. And that is never shown in these early medieval dragon depictions.
Yeah, so what you're basically saying is if this supposedly were a dinosaur that it's trying to draw, they're missing a very key feature there that you would probably see. You would
That's a very good way of putting it, yes.
Thank you. All right. And not even to mention like the idea of fire coming out of the mouth, which maybe we'll get more into later. But yeah, there are more dissimilar. So the big question is like, what is the evidence for that? And it seems like it's just mere speculation. Maybe this is part of a dinosaur. Maybe. All right. So next one. So let's talk about Beowulf. So I had no idea that there was supposedly a dinosaur or 2 or 3 in Beowulf. So apparently Grendel and his mother, as well as we can get to the dragon in the story, but apparently this Grendel figure is a dinosaur. Can you talk about that?
Yes, there are a number of anti-evolution authors who endorse the idea of Grendel and his mother as a pair of dinosaurs. And this seems to be based mainly on the misconception that somewhere in Beowulf, it says that Grendel's arms were small. It doesn't say that anywhere. And so that basis just doesn't make any sense. And okay, Grendel is a monstrous being, and he's apparently eating people. Okay, maybe that would go with some sort of large carnivore. But the The poem Beowulf also says that Grendel and his mother tended fire. Grendel wore a patchwork pouch. These are not things we would expect from an animal, dinosaurian or otherwise. And at some point, he wields a knife, if I'm not mistaken. That could be memory playing tricks on me. But the tending fire, that's solid. That's actually in there. A dinosaur that tends fire and carries a patchwork pouch would be very surprising. Also, the poem says that Grendel is a descendant of Cain. So, how could a dinosaur be a descendant of a human? It just shows that the folks who came up with this idea, again, they didn't do their homework. They are picking and choosing tiny little bits from the Beowulf poem without reading the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. In the middle quote, you'll see it says, he lived for a long time in the home of the monster race after God had condemned them as kin of Cain. So yeah, descendant. So I read a number of different scholarly works on this. So some have argued that this Grendel figure is like almost like a giant figure, kind of like the Nephilim or whatever, like some monstrous beast that is just causing chaos, and that's why he's a descendant of Cain, because of how the Genesis narrative portrays that, compared to the line of Seth. But then you have this other quote to the right here. It says, the door fastened with fire-forged bars gave way immediately. Once Grendel touched it with his hands, intent on evil, swollen with rage, he thrust open the mouth of the building. So I don't know of any idea of a dinosaur being intent on evil or swollen with rage, or how anybody would ever know if a dinosaur was making these types of psychological decisions. But it also says he has hands, and on the left side of this in the screen, you'll see it's an illustration from 1908. Some guy drew it, and yeah, he's got the little pouch there. So that's really fun. So that's Grendel. And could you just give us really a little bit of the background of Beowulf? So Beowulf is this guy or whatever that goes and attacks or has to fight three different characters, and Grendel's the first one. Is that right?
Yes, that sounds right. The character Beowulf is a hero who, in standard European folkloric hero tradition, slays monsters left and right. And one thing we need to remember about this is it is a folkloric hero story, the story of Beowulf. It's not a historical record, and to treat it as a historical record with real live animals in it, like dinosaurs and whatnot, doesn't make any sense. It's are you going to do the same with Three Bears or Goldilocks? I mean, it's almost in the same category as those. Not quite, but it's closer to that than being a historical record.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's Grendel. That was the first person or thing that Beowulf has to fight, and then Grendel's mother, right, is the second one. But any argument for that would just be, hey, Grendel and his mother are related. So any argument for his mother, we could just point back to Grendel, who is clearly not a dinosaur. And then the third option, or the third one, is the dragon in Beowulf. So could you tell us about the dragon, or I guess the narrative behind that, or maybe just the details?
Yes, the dragon is this impressive beast that flies, and it is a guardian of a stash of gold, which it may originally have found and then got greedy about it, and he may have become a dragon. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the text doesn't come out and say it. But at that time, when Beowulf was written, there was this general folkloric motif, which was pretty common in Northwest European folklore, that a greedy person would become a serpent and would coil around their treasure and become some sort of a monster, preventing other people from having access to it. So don't be too greedy, or you might become a dragon, kind of a thing, and you're not human anymore. There's some wording in the Beowulf epic that suggests that maybe this might have been the case for this particular dragon, but it never comes right out and says it. It's just a little hints. Now, something else. We should point out a dragon that used to be a human is probably not a dinosaur, because you'd be hard pressed to find any animal in nature that used to be a human, dinosaur or otherwise. Something else to mention about this is the dragon is often called a worm would be the modern way to say it, and it was an Old English way to say snake, which shows you that the snake dragon connection was alive and well at that time. And the text repeatedly says that the animal has coiled, and this is something that you wouldn't expect from a dinosaur. And a lot of the anti-evolutionists who comment on this dragon say specifically it's a pterosaur, which most folks call a pterodactyl. And the thing about a pterodactyl is it can't coil. The only part of it that you'd expect to be able to coil would be the tail, but a long-tailed pterosaur has a completely stiff tail. There's no coiling possible. And a short-tailed pterosaur has a tail that's too short to say that it has coiled. So to put all this coiling in there shows that they had snakes in mind. And in fact, the poem was written at a time when meteors were thought to be flying, flaming snakes going across the sky. Whether anybody actually believed that or not is another story, but that's what they were telling each other in the folklore. Oh, look, it's a flying snake streaking across the sky. And if you think about it, a meteor kind of looks like that. It's got the fiery part and then this tail that streaks behind it. So it kind of looks like a flying snake. And the dragon in Beowulf has various characteristics that kind of tie into that whole thing. Fieriness, for one thing, and the fact that it could fly. And interestingly, nowhere in the text does it say that this thing had wings. So a flying snake that flies by magic is what folks used to think that, or at least pretend to think that meteors were. So it could have been one of these deals. So to call it a pterodactyl when the text never even says it has wings, I'm thinking kind of a stretch.
A bit of a stretch there, yeah. Right. So yeah, sadly, there aren't a lot of good pictures that I could find, at least, of this Beowulf guy fighting the dragon. You can barely see it in the top right there, but trust me, that's what the writer or the painting person, whatever, said it was. So you just got to trust me here. So let's talk about Fafnir of Valunga Saga. So this was a new figure to me. I don't have a clue about this person. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh yes, Fafnir is a good example of a greedy person who became a dragon. That is part of his story. He was so greedy for wealth, and it overtook his mind, and then he became a dragon as a result, and guarded his treasure as a dragon. And there are anti-evolution authors who have treated the story as something akin to a historical record and saying, okay, well, the dragon Fafnir existed, therefore a dragon existed, therefore a dinosaur existed. You can kind of see the train of illogic there. It makes a little bit of sense if you don't really think about it too much. But if you pay close attention to the story, you find that here's another dragon that used to be a human. And this dragon spoke, and it spoke Old Norse. Finding a dinosaur that could speak would be something akin to miraculous. Or at least implausible. So the more you know about the story, the more you realize that this isn't a dinosaur, folks. Sorry. It's just a greedy man who morphed into something in a story, not history.
What some of the things I love about this topic is there are lots of pictures that we can look at, and if you look at it, the right and the left, you could barely notice, like, if you gotta look really hard, but you can barely notice, like, the this Fafnir figure or whatever is actually very snake-like. It's not very like the typical depiction of a dragon, like you see in the King George, or sorry, Saint George photos there. So on the left you see the almost the serpent, like, going all the way around, and like, I don't see any depiction of wings or any dinosaur figures, or even close to what a dinosaur would look like. Or on the right you could see how it's like circling around the person, and I don't have a clue what that face is supposed to look like, but I'm not familiar with any. It looks more like a rat than anything. But yeah. So any last thoughts before we keep going there?
Yeah, you got a point there about the dragon Fafnir being depicted as a serpent, and in fact, there are a number of rune stones from medieval Scandinavia in which the dragon Fafnir and his slaying is shown, and he's always shown in the form of a snake, which just goes to show you that back then they thought of a dragon as a snake. So once again, we have the dragon snake connection, not a dragon dinosaur connection.
Interesting. Very interesting. All right. So another real fun one is the topic of Chinese dragons. So pretty much everybody's seen one of these guys, but the Chinese dragon, and they're all at like the Chinese festivals and all that stuff. And well, it looks a lot like, if you look at the top left here, it looks a little bit, kind of a lot like maybe like some kind of dinosaur, possibly, or based off of it. What do you think about that? Was the history behind it? What are the main arguments for why it's the dinosaur? Tell us about it.
Well, the anti-evolutionist contingent tends to use the sort of the dinosaur of the gaps approach. If I can't tell what this looks like, I'll just call it a dinosaur, kind of thing. And I think that with the Chinese dragon, we have that in spades, because very often the so-called Chinese dragon is shown in a way that this illustration here at the top doesn't show, which is with the limbs sprawling out like a lizard. And one of the ways to diagnose a dinosaur is that it does not have limbs that sprawl out like a lizard. Instead, they go straight down toward the ground, as in a mammal. Now, that does seem to be what's shown in the top figure here, the sculpture. But the thing is, when Chinese dragons were first being depicted, they didn't sprawl, and instead they had they were given the body of a tiger, hence the mammalian stance. And you can tell this because very often you'll have a tiger and a dragon across from each other on the same thing. For example, a lot of ancient Chinese mirrors have this. And the body of the one and the body of the other and their paws are identical. And then other aspects of the dragon are different. It's got the head of a camel. It's often got an antelope's horns, or later on, these were elaborated into antlers. And it's got fish scales. I mean, really big scales that the Chinese literature says is carp scales. And often a pair of tiny little wings, but the body is definitely the tiger's, the tiger shape body. So we see that it is a combination of different animals. So it's not a single animal; it's a composite. And when you look at the literature on this from the same period, you find that the ancient Chinese didn't even think of the dragon as an animal at all. They thought of it as a a spirit, specifically a weather spirit, and its job was to bring the rain. And in fact, you could speak to the spirit and try to appease it with rituals and stuff to bring the rain if there was a drought. And so this body that is a composite of different animals, it's not really meant literally. It's kind of a figurative way to depict something that is incorporeal, that does not have a body. Kind of like a deity is supposed to be incorporeal, but it's often figured as a human, often with some special trait. Anyhow, similar thing with the Chinese dragon. It was a weather spirit. No one took it seriously as a natural animal, dinosaurian or otherwise.
Fascinating. Yeah, after looking to myself, something really stood out was we have ancient commentators, like Chinese commentators, that actually talk about it. So this guy named Wang Fu, as you see on the right, he describes this Chinese dragon, and he describes it as an amalgamation of a bunch of different animals. So it's not just like a bunch of characteristics that we would look at as like a dragon. No, it's got antlers and based on a camel and a snake and the eyes of a demon and a belly of a clam and an eagle and a tiger. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating stuff here. So next, the next fun one, I think this is my favorite of all of them, is the Marco Polo recounting. And so this has been used by Kit Hovind and a number of different people. So basically, what is it? In the writings of Marco Polo, he talks about, or we can just read what's on the screen here. Kit Hovind says, Marco Polo lived in China for 17 years around 1271 AD and reported that the emperor raised dragons to pull his chariots and parades. So that's really fun. Give us a little bit about the background here.
Here we have a case in which someone who's never read Marco Polo is making statements about it. You can tell it hasn't been read because there's no place anywhere in Marco Polo's book where he says that the emperor of China had a chariot drawn by dragons, raised by him or otherwise. In fact, the book says that the emperor's chariot was drawn by pretty girls. Now, I suppose you could mistake a pretty girl for a dragon if you've been taking hallucinogens, but other than that, it's kind of hard to make the mistake. So one thing I find very interesting is that there are so many different anti-evolution authors who make the same claim about Marco Polo's writing. What it shows is that none of these particular individuals are bothering to check with the alleged source of information. Instead, they're all quoting each other. And it goes back to the original, whoever made the mistake first is patient zero in this series of mistakes.
Right.
It's just funny to me. Once I finally read the passage in question, after trying to hunt down where in Marco Polo's book is he saying anything about the emperor's vehicle being drawn by anything. Once I finally found it and saw, oh, it's pretty girls, not dragons. I had a good laugh. It was interesting to see what the source actually said. Now, what I'm very curious about is, since that's what the source says, where did patient zero get the idea that Polo said that the vehicle was driven by dragons or drawn by dragons? Where did that come from? Because it's not in Marco Polo's writings.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. On the bottom left of the screen, you'll see when for recreation he went about the palace. He was drawn in his carriage by these damsels. So, are you saying that you'd seen a translation where it was pretty girls essentially?
Right.
Yeah.
Different translations will make slight adjustments, and In some cases, different translations make more substantial adjustments, but I've never seen any translation in which the girls have become some sort of animal, dragon or otherwise.
Right. Right. No, we don't even get a description of this supposed dragon and that's carrying doing a carriage. So like obviously, or not drag dinosaur. So we don't even get a uh, like obviously the word dinosaur doesn't exist at this time period. So
Right.
all these examples, except for this one apparently, are some type of description of, oh, that sounds a lot like dinosaur, but in this case, no, it's literally just carriage by these damsels.
Yep.
It's wild stuff. Okay, and then there is another reference that you pointed out in your book that some other people have used. So it talks about some type of, it looks like a alligator or a crocodile, and people are saying that that's some type of dinosaur. It says at the actual text says, at the forepart near the head they have two short legs having three claws with eyes larger than a four-penny loaf and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp. So that sounds, very menacing. Maybe that's a dinosaur, right? Maybe it's a dinosaur. And then it talks about the method for capturing them. They say lurk in caverns, seek food. Let's see if there's any other fun stuff here. Oh, this is a really one I wanted to show. It says, by their motion in this way along the shore and their vast weight, they make a deep impression as if a heavy beam had been drawn along the sands. And I think it was you who said, hey, yeah, this is what alligators do, right?
Right. So in that part of the world, you've got the crocodilians are in the crocodile family instead of the alligator family, but even so, either way, they're going to make a drag mark as they move along, because the tip of the tail often drags. Whereas such is not the case in dinosaurs. I mean, there may be one or two examples out there of a drag mark in a dinosaur trackway, but usually there's not. It's just the footprints because the tail is held off the ground. So that is not a description of a dinosaurian trackway there in Marco Polo's writing. And something else to point out here too is I may have been off with the whole crocodile idea because another YouTuber by the name of Aaron Ra pointed out to me that there is a translation of Marco Polo in which the description of that dragon is different in bits of it, so that instead of saying it's got three claws on limbs near the head, it's saying it's got a pair of claws more toward the pelvis, maybe, which and the other aspects of the description are consistent with a snake. And it turns out there are snakes in the area, that is to say, Southern Asia, where where this description is set, that do have a pair of little spurs on either side of the pelvis. Pythons are like this. So it could very well be that Polo was describing the locals' description of pythons.
Interesting. Yeah, so essentially the translation is ambiguous, just like a lot of biblical passages. Sometimes the translation might be a little ambiguous, a little unclear. Something we'll see here because these are ancient documents being translated, right? So,
right, and sometimes redacted. So there's never really a complete guarantee that what we have now is what was originally said.
Interesting. All right, and next we have the Arizona Havasupai Canyon Petroglyph. So this one, it looks a lot like a dinosaur. Like if you could just take this fossil and you could, let me see if I can get a better run. No, that's not gonna be it. There we go. You could just take this fossil and just put it right on the head. I'll turn around here. And it looks just like a dinosaur, right? So what do you think about that?
My first thought is when I see this petroglyph, to me, it looks a whole lot more like a clothes hanger than a dinosaur. or a fish hook with some fancy ornamentation on it. Um, it's one of those abstract things that can look like anything you want it to look like, really.
Uh,
But yeah, I can see how people think it's a dinosaur, though. It does look like we have an oval body and a neck coming out of one end with a head pointing down, and then one leg seen from the side, and then a tail that curls up like the shape of a capital J.
mhm,
The thing is, this comes from a culture in the southwestern, what is now USA, that never did draw animals with one leg hidden behind the other. So
mm,
if that's a leg, then the animal maybe only has one leg. Or look at it a different way. You got two extensions coming down from that oval. Um, what I'm seeing here is two legs, and one of these legs has an extension on it, so that J-shaped bit.
mhm,
And that's not unique to this petroglyph. I've been out west. I've seen numerous petroglyphs on the rocks out there, and there are quite a few bipedal figures that have one leg with some extension on it. And the meaning of that, who knows? It's long since been lost to time, I think. But if this is a bipedal dinosaur, then it's either a one-legged dinosaur with a tail, or more likely what we have here is a bird. The reason I'm saying that is in every case
mhm,
in which a southwestern petroglyph has a hook for a head,
mhm.
and you can tell what kind of animal it is, it's a bird. It always is. So the hook is just a stylistic way to draw a bird's head in that particular culture. And the bird interpretation is consistent with the rest of it, because very often they would put the body of a bird just as an open oval, and two legs, which is what we see in a bird. Just because there's an extension on one doesn't preclude it from being a bird, because they've got human figures too with an extension on one leg that doesn't preclude them from being meant as human. So I'm seeing a bird here, and
Mm.
it's that hook for the head. It really truly is diagnostic. This particular culture did not put a hook for a head on any recognizable animal except birds.
Hmm. Yeah. I guess if we're gonna be literal, the the bird would be like this, right? It's
Yeah,
looking straight down.
mm-hmm. Yeah, with its beak pointed down. Yeah.
I imagine there might be some health issues associated with that for that poor dinosaur.
Mm.
And
Or maybe it just stepped in something and it's taking a look.
oh yes, yes, yes. But not you see you turned yourself to this, it would be straight down.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe dinosaurs could do that. We'll have to have a paleontologist to tell us that. Uh,
Sure. Where are we going to find one of those?
uh,
Um, yeah, of
um,
course. Now, if we're going to take this to its logical extreme, it could be that the dinosaur is looking down, not because it stepped on something, but because it stepped on someone, which may be a relative of the person who drew this dinosaur on the rock wall.
oh, I see. Not crazy dinosaur, wild stuff.
Sure.
All right. And if it wasn't already clear, so on the left side here we have other what is it, petroglyphs that were found near or around or the same culture, and have some very similar ideas. The curved neck and the two legs, and the on the top right there you have it's got some type of tail looking thing, but yeah, it should not be a crazy thing to think that, hey, maybe this isn't a dinosaur, maybe this is something else.
Right.
So next one, this is a Roman mosaic in Lydney Park. Really cool stuff. That is in, what is it, Gloucestershire, England.
Mm-hmm.
And people have said, hey, these are dinosaurs, Tanestrophius. So tell me about this.
Okay, so Tanestrophius is often mistaken for a dinosaur in the anti-evolution literature, although it's not one. It's an extinct animal with 4 limbs, so it's a quadruped,
Okay.
and a very short tail, and a very long neck. Now, what we see in the Lydney Park mosaic is something with a very long neck, and only 2 limbs, not 4. And a long tail that coils. You can see it on the creature on the left a little bit better than the one on the right because of damage to the mosaic, as opposed to Tanestrophius, the real thing, which had a really short tail. Now, what's going on in this mosaic is that we have a pair of what's called a Ketos, which would be ancient Greek for a sea monster. And the Romans kept the iconographic tradition going that they used to illustrate the Ketos, spelled it a little different, Cetus, instead of starting with a kappa or a K. And it's got the same basic characteristics. A pair of flippers up front, really long neck, some mammalian ear flaps, and very often a tuft on the end of the nose. And that's exactly what we see in these Lydney Park creatures. And by the way, the ear flaps, those are something you do not expect in a reptile, whether dinosaur or Tanestrophius or otherwise. And it says mammal to the viewer, or in a creature like this, it says at least it's got a mammalian head.
Interesting. Yeah, so you kind of see this, which is common in these representations of these creatures are based off of other creatures, like a horse's head, or what is it, a cow or something, like, all these different representations, a camel. So yeah, that would explain the what is the ears or whatever that is. And so this is one of those fun ones because we have so many different pictures of this creature and there are some slight differences, but the one on the top right looks like a rabbit almost.
Yeah,
that's a fun one. And then you also talked about how this word Ketos is used in the Septuagint for the whale that swallows Jonah. So the Hebrew word is dag or dag, or however you pronounce that, but it was translated into Ketos in Greek, and then this idea of Ketos has a very specific background in Greek culture. So basically Christians and maybe some Jews came along and said, oh, so this Jonah guy was swallowed by this Ketos figure, this mythological figure, right? And so you get all these different representations of not a whale like most people think of, but this Jonah guy in the bottom right is getting swallowed by this, like this creature looks like a Pokemon, right?
Right. Yeah, and there's a bit more to it too, because the word Ketos in ancient Greek referred to more than just a sea monster. It could refer to the mythical sea monster that we see in these images, but they also used it as a generic term for any monstrous real sea animal. So whales were in the Ketos category, dolphins were in the Ketos category, seals were in that category, and sharks were in that category as well. So if it was big and frightening, and in the sea, they'd call it a Ketos. And in the myths, when the myths are illustrated, they usually put it in this monster form, the imaginary Ketos, which is in the same category.
Interesting. Now, on the top left, we have an actual dinosaur. What is this?
Oh, that one is Tanestrophius.
Oh, that's the Tanestrophius.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the tail there. It may be a bit exaggerated in length, but the rest of it seems about right. And something to notice is it has forelimbs and hind limbs, so a total of 4 limbs, making it a quadruped, in which it differs greatly from the Lydney Park mosaic, which has flippers in front and no legs in the back.
Fascinating. All right. See, okay, so we're skipping a little bit here. So the next one is, what is this? What is the Terrasque? I've never heard of this creature. It's an old French legend near the town of Nerluc. Is that a dinosaur? Tell us about the background of this creature.
All right. So according to the story, there was a dragon near the town of Nerluc that was terrorizing the people there, and they called it the Terrasque. And it was ultimately dispelled by a saint, according to the story. And the illustrations of the Terrasque are a little bit different from what you would normally expect from a dragon, because it's got multiple legs, 6 of them, not just the usual 2 or 4. And according to the earliest description of the Terrasque, it had armor on its back, like a bunch of shields, and a ridge going down the middle of the back like a sharp battle axe. And it had the head of a lion and the tail of a fish, in addition to these 6 legs, which are in the original description. So for some reason, the anti-evolution authors have picked up on the Terrasque and employing the dinosaurs of the gaps approach. If it's weird and it's obviously not some currently existing animal, must be a dinosaur. But the 6 legs and the fishtail kind of speak against that. And something else that's interesting to me is that there are a number of anti-evolution authors who say specifically it's a triceratops because of the horns. The thing is, there are no horns in the story, but they cite this as if there were horns in the story. So where they got this idea that the Terrasque had horns, I don't know, but it's not in the the medieval story of the Terrasque.
Yeah, there's a lot of really weird artwork with this one. So as you're saying, the head of a lion, I could see maybe someone think this is vaguely based off of a dinosaur, maybe. But the 6 legs, this is much more similar to like the cherubim, right, in Ezekiel, based off of 100 different animals, right? But there's a lot of other different artwork too, where surely this is not a dragon, right? Or sorry, not a dragon, but a dinosaur. Maybe
right,
that one.
You see the fishtail in that one as well, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a real fun creature. Getting a history lesson today. Did you have any other things you wanted to add there before we keep going?
No, I think that'll about do it.
Alrighty. So the next one we have is Humbaba. This is a fun one because people of the channel will be relatively familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I had no idea there was a dinosaur in the middle of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Like, this is some very has close ties to the story of Noah and the flood. And there was a dinosaur in that's pretty wild. So tell us about this Humbaba figure.
Well, in the story of Gilgamesh, Humbaba is the guardian of a forest, and he's this huge, difficult to conquer creature that Gilgamesh ultimately slays with the help of a friend. And the anti-evolution authors, this is Iggy. he's named after a dinosaur, by the way. Iguanodon is the full name.
Oh, there you go.
Hi, Iggy. Hi. Okay, that was me. I said hi. Yeah. The earliest anti-evolution author to mention Gilgamesh and Humbaba says that Humbaba was a reptilian thing, and from this he extrapolates to dinosaur, and it was illustrated as a sauropod. And you've got the illustration right there from this this book. And from that point on, a whole bunch of subsequent anti-evolution authors then just took this guy's idea and ran with it and kept it as a sauropod in their illustrations, and we're saying it's a dinosaur. Even there's nothing at all in the story of Gilgamesh that suggests it's reptilian or dinosaurian or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And in the ancient Babylonian illustrations of the story that we have on cylinder seals and plaques and so forth, Humbaba is always shown as a monstrous humanoid figure, which is what he seems to be from the story. He speaks, for example, in the story, something you don't expect a dinosaur to do. And yeah, here we have some pictures of Humbaba. Now, if you take your eyes and zoom in on that figure on the right and look at his face really close, you'll see it is made of coiled intestine.
Oh.
This is because the face of Humbaba was used as a divination thing in ancient Babylon. They would throw the entrails of some domestic mammal into a container and look for the face of Humbaba in the intestines. And it was supposed to mean something if you saw that. I haven't memorized the details, but this is why he's shown as coiled intestine in his face. Yeah.
This is another fun one, because if supposedly, like, even if this young creationist is right, it's like this is depicting a dinosaur, like, or maybe it's vague enough that it would be depicting a dinosaur. Maybe it is, it's possible, right? This could be it. But then when we actually have artwork of it and it doesn't look anything like a dinosaur, right? So yeah, this is just it's just another one of those really fun claims. But on the left is, I believe that's from the book, but they're in the video version of it. It's basically just this one dragon. The Gilgamesh goes and fights, and it just shows Gilgamesh walking, and then the dinosaur appears, and there's no citation, there's no quote from the story. It's like, this is Humbaba. Ooh, can you believe it? It is a dinosaur.
Right. And this is another example of a young Earth creationist author that didn't bother to do his homework, because he's calling it a reptilian monster or a dragon, and there's nothing in the Babylonian story of Gilgamesh that says anything like a dragon or reptile or serpent or anything like that. So this is this individual's own imagination getting away with him, and then other people trusting him as an information source, and it just snowballs from there.
Yeah, this is fun because it just really makes you think, why would someone ever think that there was a dinosaur in this? Because there's no argument given. It's just a huge reptile-like animal which ate trees and reeds.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a fun little story, everybody. Put a comment in the description if you think that the source of why someone would think that there was a dinosaur in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So let's see. The next one is, I think I'm skipping something here. Oh, that's awkward. Ireland, Scattery Island. Okay, that is the Stegosaur. Okay, I'm back here. There we go. All right. So the next one we have is the mixed stegosaur, and it's called the mixed because it's from Ireland, right?
Right.
In this book and in these videos, the people say an Irish writer recorded an encounter with a large beast with iron nails on its tail, which pointed backwards. Its head was shaped a little bit like a horse's, and it had thick legs with strong claws. These details match features of dinosaurs like the Kentrosaurus and the Stegosaurus. They had sharp pointed spines on their tails, thick legs, strong claws, and long skulls. So what is the background of this mixed Stegosaurus?
First, let me point out that the head of a stegosaur is horse-like in shape, and it does have spikes on its tail. So when the younger creationist author came up with this idea, horse-like head plus spikes on the tail, you can see how those two things would be put together in someone's mind to come up with a stegosaur. It also shows, again, that they didn't do the rest of their homework, though, because the rest of the description of the monster says that tail was fluked like a whale's, and it was the animal could traverse both land and sea, not something you'd expect from a stegosaur. It had one eye, and a horse's mane, and a pair of limbs with claws, a pair. Stegosaurus had two pairs. So when you put the whole description together, basically it's a one-eyed Ketos that survived into the Middle Ages, and the rest of the story is kind of a typical medieval hagiography. In other words, a saint's life story, in which some elaboration has taken place. Yeah. They might have some legitimate details of the life of Saint Sinan in that account, but this one, where he encounters this monster and then dispels it, that's just something a saint is expected to do when you're writing in the Middle Ages. There should be a dispelling of a monster somewhere, and so here we have it on Scattery Island. By the way, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Senan. The name seems to be related to the name Shannon, so that first S might be pronounced as a sh. This I don't know.
Okay, that's fun. Yeah, so you talked about this in your article on the topic, but I guess the background of this story is it was from a 15th century text called the Book of Lismore, and then it was supposedly written around 700 AD. So it's a collection of texts of what we have, but it was written previously. And it talks about the life of Saint Sinan, a 6th century monk, and this guy named Raphael tells him to build a church on Scattery Island, and then the island is guarded by God's monster to repel sinners. So it's some fancy magical island where God has placed this mixed stegosaur to keep sinners away. And then in the story, the angels carry this Sinan guy to the island, and then eventually they have to fight the dinosaur, supposedly. And you could read the description if you want. What you pointed out, which was interesting, was that this whole idea of like translation. So you pointed out how it seems like the writer of what's his name, Paul Taylor, in the book on it, it seems like he's drawing from one specific translation, but other translations don't seem to have the same description. So like you mentioned, the translation that Taylor seems to be coming from has no mention of a mane and no mention of it being as long as an island. So in other words, like if you're going to make some argument that this is a dinosaur, that's either worth mentioning, or some argument for why your translation has to be the right one needs to be made. Otherwise, there's big things that are contradicting your view if you use an older translation, as stated on the screen. You talk about this, but even if we do use the description of this 1971 translation, it describes the front end was like a horse, had a glowing, blazing eye in its head, rapidly rolling. Dude, I didn't know dinosaurs rolled. What would that even be? I think
that's referring to the eye rolling around in its socket.
Oh. I don't know. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. It had two hideous, thick legs under it in front, and iron claws, fiery breath which burned like embers. It had a belly like a pair of bellows, the tail fins of a whale on it behind with iron nails on them. So the tail fins of a whale. That's an interesting description there. Pointing backwards, it would travel over sea and land alike. Did you know of any dinosaurs that did sea and land?
No. In fact, the only dinosaur that's been accused of being aquatic recently is Spinosaurus. But
Huh.
when you really take a close look at its anatomy, you find that it probably was not a swimmer and probably a fish eater, because its relatives, we know that they ate fish because of stomach contents. But it was apparently living like an oversized heron, wading at the water's edge, and catching fish that way, not swimming, because its tail and the rest of its body just were not conducive to those the swimming motions that reptiles tend to make.
Interesting. And then finally, it says, now the sea would boil with the extent of its heat and venomousness when it rushed into it, and the boats could not catch it. So apparently this Stegosaurus was like super fast.
Right. So the medieval Godzilla, boats can't catch it. It's got those, ornamentation on its back. Actually, ornamentation on its back isn't even mentioned in the text, is it? And you'd expect that if they were looking at a stegosaur.
Yeah, so you're saying one of the really key defining characteristics, what is the word? The spike-looking things? What is it called?
Yeah, the plates on its back. You'd expect them to be mentioned because, like you said, they're a key defining characteristic of a stegosaur. When you see it, you don't not notice that.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, is this a Stegosaurus? You decide. All right. So next, which I am way out of order here. Let's try and find out where I'm supposed to be. All right. So we already looked at these guys. Oh, and I want to mention these real quick. So this, what is the actual figure describing? And you talk about, this is probably like the Ketos that we talked about in the other one. So could you one more time just give us the description of what this Ketos is? So it looks like it's some type of aquatic creature that looks like similar to a dragon, but clearly isn't. Is that right?
Yes, the monstrous Ketos in Greek and Roman art, it's usually got one pair of limbs that are flippers in the front, none in the back. It's got a coiling abdomen, a fish tail on the end, usually a pair of ear flaps on the head, sometimes but not always, a tuft on the end of the nose, and a furry ruff out to the sides of its cheeks. So definitely a mammalian sort of a head there. And it's the flukes at the end of the tail and the fact that it's aquatic that makes me draw the comparison with the Scattery Island monster, the so-called McStegosaur, and also the fact that they mentioned the mane, because the Ketos is often drawn with a mane.
That makes sense. I see. Yeah, and as we talked about before, this Ketos figure is really fun because in the Septuagint, the Jonah's whale or Jonah's fish that he was swallowed in was translated as Ketos, and then you had people later drawing this Ketos, which is a Greek animal, essentially a Greek mythical animal, swallowing Jonah. So in the bottom right, and then the left picture, you'll see people getting swallowed or spitting out or whatever. Yeah, that's Jonah in there. Surprise. But that doesn't necessarily mean like this exact figure, this Ketos figure, is the same specific exact figure as known in this other text, the Stegosaurus, quote unquote, Stegosaurus Irish text, because what is the idea that these figures, they change essentially characteristics based off the culture, right? So So one culture might use it in a slightly different way, and that's why we have so many different depictions of this Ketos figure, and they're not all exactly the same, or most of them aren't exactly the same, because they can change depending on how they're used or the culture that they're living in as people are passing this story down.
Correct. And it should also be noted, too, that the Scattery Island monster has features you don't normally have in a Ketos, like a single eye, claws on the front limbs, and nail-like extensions on the flukes. So if it was meant as a Ketos, it's a very special one. So it seems to me there's a connection between it and the Ketos, and it may not have been meant as a Ketos per se, but it's Ketos adjacent, to put it that way.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for mentioning that. All righty. So the next thing we have, and oh, by the way, I called it the Mykitos because it's from Ireland,
location,
right?
yes.
Yeah. Not to be mixed up with McDonald's.
Right. Yeah. I would like fries with my Mykitos, please.
Right. All righty. So let's talk about this dragon of the North figure. So is that the Scandinavian legend?
Well, if you are the young Earth creationist author who said so, then you might think it's a Scandinavian legend. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, the story has only ever been recorded in one spot, and that is a collection of German fairy tales from the 19th century. And there's no indication that the story is any older than that, or that it was ever told anywhere else. But the young Earth creationist author who cites this dragon as a so-called dinosaur calls it an old Scandinavian tale. So getting the details wrong right off the bat.
That's fun. So just for clarity, so it reads, one old legend describes a reptile-like animal that had a body about the size of a large cow. Its two back legs were long and strong, but its front legs were remarkably short, and its jaws were quite large. One of the unique things about many dinosaurs was their short front legs compared to their long, strong back legs. Many also had large jaws. Examples of dinosaurs which fit are the Edmontosaurus and the Iguanodon. So that's fun. Didn't you say that your cat was named after the iguanodon?
Yeah, that's right.
There you go. Who knew? Maybe that your cat is like related to some Scandinavian cow-looking figure. That's pretty crazy.
It could be. I would not discount the possibility just because it makes no sense.
Okay. Yeah, but so this is not actually a Scandinavian thing, which just makes these fun things, like this guy Paul Taylor and a lot of these other people that make these arguments rarely cite their sources for where they're getting this information. But so this is actually supposedly a dragon from the north. Could you talk about that?
Yes, supposedly this is a dinosaur because of all dragons are based on dinosaur encounters, if you believe that mindset. And also the short forelimbs, and the fact that it could leap. In the story, the author, I think it was Paul Taylor, drew a connection between that and the painting of leaping Dryptosauruses that Charles Knight painted early in the 20th century or late 19th century. And when you look at the real details in the story, it looks less and less like a dinosaur the more you look at it. For example, the length of the leap was a half mile, if I remember right.
Yep.
Something that no animal could do, and the length of the dragon's tail as given in the story, I forget the figure there, but it's longer than the entire body of a T-Rex. So the size of the animal as given in the story is not realistic for a dinosaur. Now, an anti-evolutionist could argue that over the generations, the story changed and the dinosaur got less and less realistic. How can you argue against that? But it's just another example of calling a dragon a dinosaur when, if you know your dragon history, dragon legends originally were based on snakes, not anything with feet.
Right. Alrighty. And then let's see here what else there is. Okay. So that's okay. So let's talk about the the Sioux legend. That what it's called? The Thunderbird. So let me see if I can pull this up. Okay. Okay. No, that's all right. We don't have it. Alrighty. So yep. So this there's this fun video where it describes this apparently the origin of the Thunderbird in Native American legend. Could you talk about basically the outline of what this video is essentially saying, and maybe the origin of that?
Yes, according to Paul Taylor's video, the Thunderbird legend is based on an incident in which these Native American scouts were riding out west and saw a flying creature get struck by lightning and fall. So they went to find the body because they were intrigued, and when they found it, basically they found a pterodactyl, and so the pterodactyl is the origin of the Thunderbird story, according to Paul Taylor. Now, the interesting thing is, Paul Taylor's story is not a part of any Native American lore at all. And in fact, there are bits of it that Taylor himself just made up. He got the story from a children's dinosaur book by an author named Darlene Geis, who had created a story that she made up about some Native American scouts who were in a lightning storm, and fast forward a little bit, and they find a fossil pterodactyl skeleton. And then Paul Taylor comes along and changes the story and makes it a live pterodactyl, and they saw it die. And he's calling that a Native American legend, even though he made up those details himself. And Darlene Geis is presenting it kind of as a Native American legend, even though she made up the story that we're showing here. Now, there are bits and pieces of it that were part of a story that was recorded by A. Hyatt Verrill a few decades previous to that. So Geis's story was probably based in part on a genuine Native American legend, but she changed so many of the details that when we have the original story that Verrill recorded and then Geis's story side by side, we see these are really two different things. Geis's story is mostly made up, and then Taylor's version of it adds details that make it so basically he created his very own Native American legend, and then says that what came out of his own mind was the Native American basis for the Thunderbird myth. So,
yeah, he specifically says they called it the Thunderbird, and it has appeared in Indian tales ever since.
Right.
Tales,
So
not just one tale.
What we have here is a fake Indian legend. It's not even a real one. It's so laughable that Taylor's statements are. I mean, and the same is the case in most of his book and his film. So much of it is laughable. As we've already seen, he got the details wrong on nearly every story with an alleged dinosaur in it that he used in the movie and in the book.
Mm.
And one thing that's also funny to me is that another subsequent young Earth creationist author cited Paul Taylor's book as, quote, a detailed study, unquote. Now, the book is a children's book. This is probably the only time in history that a children's book has been called a detailed study.
Oh man.
Study my left eyeball. It's a lot of it is Taylor's own imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate your quote here in your article. So you say the verbatim and near verbatim quotes and other similarities indicate that Geis's narrative was the Taylor film's source. Interestingly, the details of the two narratives reveal differences in purpose. The purpose of Geis's narrative was to explain the Thunderbird concept as based on fossils. Accordingly, in Geis's narrative, the warriors think that they see a bird shape fall to the ground, and then they find a fossil skeleton. In contrast, the purpose of the Taylor's film story was to explain the Thunderbird concept as based on live petrosaurs. Accordingly, in the Taylor film's narrative, the warriors do see a flying creature fall to the ground. They witness its death by lightning, which makes the skeleton a non-fossil. That's a very fair point, right? So if they saw it fall, that would not be a fossil. It's not like all the skin and everything that else that takes a fossil to happen just happens just like that, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's really funny. That's something. So you could see how one person reading another story just barely changes some details, and then another person reading that second story really just makes a whole mess of things, and that you simply just can't trust people. You just can't, no matter how smart or intelligent or reliable they are. You just simply just can't trust people on some of these basic facts, especially if they're not an expert historian or anything like that, right?
Yes, and one of the corollaries of what you just said, changing details of the story, for example, to suit your own purpose. You find this a lot in the anti-evolution literature. You find young Earth creationist authors taking some old myth or some old legend and changing the details to turn the animal into a dinosaur to suit their own purposes. And in essence, what they're doing is creating brand new legends, brand new myths. And a study of those would be interesting in its own right. Some folklorist needs to get on this, because the young Earth creationist literature on dinosaurs is a set of brand new folklore that was not there before. So many of these old tales have been modified in ways that make them brand new stories. And the creativity involved, nefarious though its purposes may be, and that the fact that you're changing a story and presenting it as the old story, which is bald-faced lies. At the same time, the evolution of these stories, because they change from one creationist author to the next, often after these new stories are created. It would be just a fascinating thing to chronicle.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so I really do appreciate you coming on here. So we talked about a lot of different supposed dinosaurs today, but you wrote a lot more in your book. So I'd strongly recommend people check it out in the description of just all these different creatures. Maybe we'll have you again to talk about it. Another thing I wanted to quickly reference is, I believe it's Keaton Haley. He wrote for creation.com on a lot. He's a young Earth creationist, okay? And he wrote on a lot of these other proposed dinosaurs and archaeology and art. And he's basically saying, hey, yeah, these guys, they're also not actual dinosaurs. He mentions the Ketos, and he cites one of your articles in there, actually. So that's fun. But yeah, so you like, this is not some like evolutionist bashing young Earth creationist. Maybe it is, but like you don't have to be young Earth. You don't have to be an evolutionist to agree with us here. Like, there are lots of young Earth creationists are coming around to say, hey, we have to be honest with the evidence. We have to be really specific and make strong arguments. Otherwise, our case will not look as strong to people outside looking in. Like if a bunch of your arguments look like you're changing the facts or even lying, then that's just not going to look good. That's not going to look like a strong argument. You're not going to convince anybody. Any thoughts to add there?
Yeah, I think credit should be given where credit is due. And this particular young Earth creationist deserves credit for going against the grain in that community and saying, "Look, guys, we're wrong here." I think this is a step in the right direction. And the jettisoning of pseudo evidence is something that should be done. And this particular individual is advocating exactly that. So yeah, thumbs up to that. And it's like I said, it's a step in the right direction. It is a sensible thing to do. So it's nice to see somebody out there advocating good sense instead of a holding on to nonsense.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on here. People should definitely check out your book, scholarly articles. Is there anything else that you want people to check out? We actually did a video previously on a similar topic. Anything else?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Awesome.
So yeah, thanks for all the shout outs to the book, The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons. And folks, yeah, if you want the real story that includes the history of the fake stories, you'll find it in those pages.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, that'll be in the description. Please definitely check that out. Really, really great book there. Otherwise, I really do appreciate you coming on here.
No,
as we say often here. So if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, subscribe anyways, but the next video is going to be really awesome too. But thanks so much for coming on here, Dr. Center. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
All right. Thanks. You too, Zach.